In the early 19th century, murder had a favorite tool. It was cheap, easy to buy, and dissolved without a trace. Its symptoms, violent stomach pain, convulsions, and agonizing thirst, perfectly mimicked deadly diseases like cholera. The French called it poudre de succession, the inheritance powder. We know it today as arsenic. For centuries, it was the poisoner's perfect weapon because proving it was there was nearly impossible. A killer could simply deny it, and science had no answer. It was a ghost in the system of justice. But the story of one woman, a suspicious cake, and a device that could create an arsenic mirror would bring the golden age of poison to a dramatic end. This is Marie Capelle. Born in 1816 to a good family with aristocratic ties, she was raised to appreciate the finer things in life: literature, music, and the elegant salons of Paris. But tragedy struck early. Orphaned and left with a meager dowry, her future was precarious. At 23, her prospects were dwindling. So, in 1839, a matchmaker arranged a marriage. Her suitor was Charles Lafarge, a provincial ironmaster from a place that couldn't be further from Paris. Marie was told he was a wealthy widower with a grand chateau. Desperate, she agreed. The reality was a waking nightmare. The Chateau Le Glandier was no palace. It was a damp, crumbling fortress infested with rats. Charles Lafarge was not the polished gentleman she expected. He was coarse, unrefined, and, as she soon discovered, drowning in debt. In her letters home, she called her new home a tomb. She felt deceived, isolated, and utterly trapped. In December of 1839, just a few months into the marriage, Charles left for Paris on a business trip to secure a loan. While he was away, Marie wrote him affectionate letters and sent a care package. Inside was a small cake she had baked herself. Shortly after eating a piece, Charles became violently ill. He wrote to Marie, describing his symptoms. He managed to secure his loan and returned to Le Glandier, weak and unwell. His condition only worsened. He was confined to his bed, racked with fever and crippling stomach pain. And that's when the household staff began to notice something strange. Multiple witnesses, servants, his mother, and other family members, saw Marie repeatedly stirring a white powder from a small box into his food and drinks. When they finally confronted her, Marie had a ready excuse. It was simply arsenic, she explained, which she had purchased from the local chemist to deal with the chateau's overwhelming rat problem. It was a plausible story. Arsenic was, after all, a common rat poison. Local doctors performed an autopsy. They took samples from the victim's stomach and subjected them to the standard chemical test of the day. The courtroom waited. The result was a bombshell. They could find no conclusive trace of arsenic. For Marie, it was a moment of vindication. For the prosecution, it was a disaster. Eyewitnesses had seen her with the poison, but the science of the day had failed to find it. It seemed Marie Lafarge would walk free, another killer shielded by the limitations of forensic science. But the prosecution refused to give up. They called for the body to be exhumed and for one man to be brought in, a man who was about to change criminal justice forever. His name was Mathieu Orfila, the Spanish-born dean of medicine in Paris and the undisputed father of modern toxicology. He was a scientific celebrity, a man whose expertise was legendary. But the tool he would bring to the trial was not his own invention. It came from a British chemist named James Marsh. Just a few years earlier, in 1836, Marsh had been frustrated when a killer walked free because his arsenic test was too unstable to present to a jury. Vowing to never let it happen again, he created the Marsh Test. It was both incredibly sensitive and dramatically conclusive. Here's how it worked. A sample from the victim is placed in a flask with zinc and acid. If arsenic is present, it turns into a flammable gas. This gas is then channeled through a narrow glass tube that is intensely heated. As the gas passes through the heat, it decomposes, leaving behind a deposit of pure metallic arsenic. It formed a perfect silvery black mirror inside the tube. No more murky liquids or ambiguous results. This was physical proof, an arsenic mirror that a killer could not explain away. The trial of Marie Lafarge became a national sensation. The courtroom was packed with journalists and spectators. The stage was set for a battle between eyewitness testimony and failed science. When Mathieu Orfila arrived, he brought his laboratory with him. In a move of incredible scientific theater, he conducted the Marsh Test on samples from the exhumed body right there in front of the judge, jury, and a breathless public. The defense attorneys scoffed, certain this fancy Parisian expert would find nothing, just as the local doctors had. For hours, Orfila worked meticulously. Finally, he turned to the court. He held up a series of glass tubes. The courtroom gasped. There, for everyone to see, were the unmistakable, damning mirrors of arsenic. Orfila declared that not only was arsenic present, but it was present in massive quantities throughout the body. The ghost had been caught. The invisible weapon was finally visible. Science had spoken, and its voice was irrefutable. The jury found Marie Lafarge guilty. It was a landmark verdict, the first murder conviction in history secured by the rigorous, validated science of toxicology. She was sentenced to hard labor for life. She would die in prison a decade later, professing her innocence to the very end. But the legacy of her case echoed far beyond the walls of Le Glandier. The Lafarge trial sent a shockwave through the criminal underworld. The poisoner's favorite trick was gone. Thanks to the Marsh Test, police and prosecutors finally had a weapon to fight back. Forensic science had won its first major battle in the courtroom, proving it could give a voice to the dead and unmask the most cunning of killers. A direct line can be drawn from Orfila's glass tube to the DNA labs of today. And it all began with one unhappy wife, and the damning reflection she left behind in an arsenic mirror. Thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Where It Went Wrong.